My name is Kathy. The house is quiet tonight, and I'm sitting on the back porch, watching the sun dip low as the air cools just enough to bring a sense of relief. I'm not happy yet, but I feel peaceful, and that's a foundation I can build on. I often find my mind wandering back to that fateful night at the restaurant. It was a Friday, and we were out with our two closest couples, friends who had stood by us through the ups and downs since college. Halfway through the second bottle of wine, the conversation turned to marriage. One of the wives was gushing about how her husband still made her feel special after 10 years. It was sweet and sincere. Then, my husband, Jake, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "That's nice," he said, "but let's be realistic. The spark fades in marriage. It makes people complacent." I kept cutting my chicken, choosing to let him talk. He continued, "I love her," gesturing vaguely in my direction without even looking at me. But let's face it, women notice me everywhere, at the gym, at work, even at the grocery store. There was a palpable shift at the table, a subtle unease. He nonchalantly added, "If I wanted to, I could replace her in a week, maybe less." The silence that followed was deafening. I calmly set my fork down, took a sip of water, and said, "You're probably right." He blinked, his smile widening. "See? She gets it." That's when I leaned back and softly uttered 4 names. Just 4. The color drained from his face, and in that instant, I realized something with terrifying clarity. I was no longer angry, I was done reacting. The silence after I said those names was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. For a moment, no one at the table spoke, not our friends, not Jake. Even the background noise of the restaurant, the clinking glasses, the laughter from nearby tables, and the hum of the Friday night seemed distant, as if we'd been cut off from the rest of the world. Jake finally broke the silence, his voice sharp and defensive. "What are you talking about?" I looked at him calmly, no trace of anger or smugness, just the end of pretense. "You said you could replace me in a week," I replied. "I'm just pointing out that you've been preparing for that possibility for months." Our friends stared at us, confused. One of the wives frowned, as if trying to solve a puzzle that was no longer hypothetical. Jake tried to brush it off, forcing a laugh that fell flat. "Those are just people I know." I began to list the details, one by one. "The first one, you've been messaging for 6 months. You met her for coffee twice and lunch twice. One time, you told me you were meeting your cousin." Across the table, someone gasped sharply. Jake snapped, "I can have female friends." I retorted, "Of course you can, but friends don't have deleted message threads and late-night check-ins when your wife is asleep." His hands started to shake, and he tried to hide them under the table. I continued, "The second woman works at your gym. You text her after 10 p.m. And I've seen the notifications light up your phone when you thought I was asleep." One of the husbands leaned back slowly, his eyes wide. No one interrupted me. "The third one is your coworker. You said she was just helping you with a project, but you stayed late 6 times last month. I called your office one night, and they said you'd left 2 hours earlier." Jake's voice cracked as he said, "This is insane." Then I said the last name. "The fourth one is my younger sister, Lily." There was an audible gasp. Jake's face went from pale to red in seconds. He quickly said, "Nothing happened with any of them. We just talked." I leaned forward slightly. "Maybe nothing physical happened, but you spent 7 months building escape routes, testing the waters, and making sure you had options before deciding if I was still worth staying married to." I added, "And you were careless, doing it on devices and accounts I could access." He shot back, "You went through my phone?" I replied evenly, "I pay for the phone plan. I can see every number, every timestamp, every pattern. I noticed when your behavior changed, when you started staying late, dressing better for work, and going to the gym twice a day." Everyone at the table was now looking at him. I finished, "So, when you say you could replace me in a week, you're not wrong. You've been auditioning replacements for months." Jake stood up, his chair scraping loudly. I'm not doing this here, he said. I asked, where would you like to? At home? In front of a lawyer? He grabbed his jacket and walked out, leaving me sitting there with an untouched plate of pasta and 4 friends who didn't know where to look. One of the husbands apologized, and I asked if any of them had known. They all shook their heads. One of the wives started crying and whispered, especially your sister. I replied quietly, yeah, that one surprised me too. I stayed and finished my meal, not because I was strong, but because I refused to leave as if I'd done something wrong. When I got home, the house was dark, not the peaceful kind, but a deliberate darkness. No lamps were on, and there was no television humming in the background. Just silence pressing against the walls. Jake was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine, the bottle open on the coffee table, as if he'd been waiting or rehearsing. He said, we need to talk. I didn't turn on the lights. I slowly set my keys down and sat in the chair across from him. I replied, now you want to talk. He said, his voice wounded, you humiliated me in front of our friends. I retorted, I stated facts. You humiliated yourself by creating them. He insisted again, nothing happened. I swear, nothing physical. I watched him carefully. You lied to me for months. Why would today be the day you suddenly start telling the truth? He looked down at his glass. For a moment, I almost believed him. He finally said, because it's true. I liked the attention. I liked feeling wanted, but I never crossed that line. I said, you crossed it emotionally, 4 times. One of them was with my sister. He flinched. She came on to me, he said quickly. I didn't pursue her. I replied, but you didn't stop it. You kept responding. You let it continue. I asked, when did it start? He hesitated for too long. 3 months ago, he said. At your parents' anniversary dinner. The memory hit me hard. I'd been outside helping my dad, a kind-hearted but sometimes absent-minded man, carry boxes from the garage. Just 20 minutes, and that was all it took. I asked, what did she say to you? He muttered, she said you didn't appreciate me, that you'd stopped noticing. I stared at him. Instead of talking to your wife, you started collecting backups. He said, I didn't think of it like that. I asked, how did you think of it? He didn't answer. That night, we slept in separate rooms. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying all the moments I'd dismissed, the late nights, the short answers, the shift from a true partnership to a performance. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't deciding whether to save my marriage, I was deciding whether it deserved saving. I confronted Lily before anyone else. Her betrayal cut deeper than I'd anticipated. She answered the phone cheerfully at first, but that disappeared as soon as she heard my voice. How long? I asked. There was silence. That's not an answer, I said. 3 months, she whispered. Nothing happened, I swear. I replied, I don't care what didn't happen. I care that you crossed a line you knew you shouldn't. She cried, apologized, saying she was lonely and felt invisible. I said, it didn't go far, but you went far enough. I hung up, knowing that something had been permanently broken. Next, I messaged the other women. My messages were short, direct, and emotionless. Stay away from my husband. If you contact him again, I'll make sure your partners see the messages you sent. 2 of them immediately apologized, giving long explanations, talking about boundary confusion and regret. The gym woman tried to pretend they were just workout buddies, but I sent her a screenshot, and she stopped replying. Jake watched all of this from a distance, quiet and seemingly smaller, as if the consequences had finally made him aware of his actions. Counseling was my condition for not filing for divorce immediately. We had individual therapy and couples therapy, no shortcuts. He agreed quickly, not out of bravery but out of fear. The therapist was impartial. She asked questions that forced us to be honest rather than putting on a show. She asked Jake, "Why did you seek validation elsewhere?" He talked about aging, social media, and feeling desirable when everything else in our life had become routine. All understandable feelings, but the therapist pointed out, "But you handled those feelings by betraying trust. That's the part we can't ignore." Then she turned to me. "Why did you stay silent when you first noticed something was wrong?" I didn't have a clear answer. It was a mix of pride, fear, and hope. I'd noticed the changes months earlier. I could have confronted him then, but instead, I gathered evidence and prepared. The therapist observed, "You both protected yourselves instead of the marriage." She was right. 6 weeks of therapy didn't fix us, but it did clarify things. After a particularly tough session, we sat in the parking lot in silence. Jake finally said, "I don't know if I can do this." I asked, "The therapy?" He admitted, "Being married to someone who knows what I did. You look at me like you're waiting." I thought about it and asked, "For what? For me to fail again?" He said, "I think we're done. We just didn't want to admit it." He was right. Love can't survive avoidance. 4 months later, the divorce was finalized. Once we stopped pretending, everything moved quickly and efficiently. There were no screaming matches or drawn-out battles, just paperwork, timelines, and the quiet end of a life we'd built together. I kept the house, not out of spite but out of practicality. It had been mine emotionally long before the legal division. Jake took some furniture, half of our savings, and his car. It was fair, clean, and final. He moved out within 2 weeks, staying with a friend at first and then finding an apartment across town. The house felt strange after that, quieter, emptier, but also more honest. I repainted the bedroom, rearranged the living room, and donated things we'd chosen together but that no longer felt like me. These were small acts of reclaiming my space. Lily and I don't speak anymore. My parents, who are generally warm-hearted but sometimes meddling, tried to fix things. They organized a family dinner, a neutral ground, hoping for forced politeness. But we sat across from each other like strangers with a shared past. Some betrayals can't be healed by the passage of time. Therapy has helped me. I've continued going even after the divorce was final, not to understand what Jake did, but to understand why I tolerated the silence for so long. I've been on a few dates, but nothing serious. Starting over at this stage in life is strange. Everyone has their own baggage, and everyone is cautious, but there's also clarity. There are no more illusions to protect. Our friends have stayed by my side. In fact, they've become closer and more protective. They check in on me and include me in their plans. I'm the single friend now, an adjustment, but one I can manage. I heard that Jake is seeing someone, one of the women from the gym. I hope it works out for him, not because I'm being generous, but because I want his choices to have meaning. I want him to find what he was searching for while tearing our marriage apart. That night at the restaurant, the joke, the silence, the names, it wasn't my proudest moment. Public exposure rarely is. But it was honest, and honesty was what our marriage had lacked the most. People always show you who they are if you're willing to watch instead of make excuses. And as I sit here on the back porch, I know that this newfound peace is a start, a foundation for a future that I can shape on my own terms.